For almost 2 months, America had watched Waco, Texas, and waited. Now the end was here. It took barely half an hour for the boxy ranch house known as Mount Carmel to burn to the ground. Inside, David Koresh and 80 of his followers, including about 20 children, died. It had all begun with a botched raid on the house on February 28, 1993. Agents of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms stormed the rambling headquarters of the Branch Davidians, a splinter group of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. The ATF's main target was the group's charismatic leader, Vernon Howell, now known as David Koresh. The ATF, a division of the U.S. Treasury Department, had been investigating Koresh for months, suspecting that he had been illegally converting semi-automatic weapons to automatics. As part of the operation, the ATF rented this house across the street from the religious group's ranch. 4 agents posed as college students. According to Branch Davidian Clive Doyle, his group knew something was suspicious about the 4.
They didn't have any furniture, they didn't seem to have any clothing bags per se, but all these long, which we wondered whether they were rifle cases or whatever. We didn't know at the time.
Going on.
Branch Davidian Sheila Martin says Koresh warned his followers to keep an eye on the 4 students.
But he still invited these men. He still let them come in, and especially Rodriguez, he was the one who wanted to have the Bible study.
ATF undercover agent Robert Rodriguez was assigned to penetrate the group by showing interest in Koresh's teachings. Koresh began giving him private instruction in the Bible. The ATF decided they would raid the ranch, arrest David Koresh, and search the property for illegal weapons. Then, 2 days before the date chosen for the raid, the Waco Tribune-Herald began a 7-part series on Koresh, branding him the sinful Messiah. The ATF sent Agent Rodriguez back into the Branch Davidian house to see how much the articles had upset Koresh. Koresh was indeed upset.
He said, Robert, I can see now that I have enemies that are determined to do things against me and to say things, and they're determined to put me down. And Robert sat and listened, and he says, I expect them to come.
Worried that the articles would make Koresh paranoid, raid commanders decided to attack the ranch a day early. On the morning of Sunday, February 28th, the ATF rolled out to their staging area, 6 miles from the Mount Carmel house. Reporters from the Tribune-Herald and KWTX-TV, acting on a tip, rolled out too. Somehow that morning, the Branch Davidians were also tipped off. Exactly how it happened is still unclear, but it would have tragic consequences. Lost on his way to the raid, TV cameraman Jim Peeler stopped at this corner and asked a mailman for directions to the house. Peeler didn't realize it, but the mailman was David Koresh's brother-in-law and a Branch Davidian. The ATF believes Peeler told the mailman about the raid, and that the mailman rushed home to sound the alarm. But another KWTX crew believes the ATF gave themselves away when their National Guard helicopters circled the house well before the agents on the ground arrived.
2 small ones and a big command helicopter. And they circled the compound about 3 times, and we...
Something that the ATF and the FBI categorically deny. I mean, they flat out told us we were lying when we told them that we saw 3 helicopters fly in and right up to the compound.
Inside the house, Koresh was talking with undercover agent Rodriguez. According to Rodriguez, someone called Koresh away. When he came back minutes later, Koresh said, "They're coming, Robert. They're coming." Rodriguez knew the ATF secret was out. He stuttered an excuse for leaving. Rodriguez phoned the mission commanders and told them to call off the raid. Instead, the ATF moved the raid earlier by 45 minutes. It was a violation of every rule of law enforcement, including standing orders from the ATF top brass to scuttle the mission if it was compromised. Inside the house, the Branch Davidians were arming themselves for the coming action.
I didn't quite know what was going on, but I can remember David coming in and making a statement like, I don't want anybody to do anything stupid, just stay cool. In fact, if I remember correctly, he told everybody just to return to their rooms, you know, and that he was going to go to the door. He said somebody was coming.
2 pickup trucks pulling cattle trailers brought 75 ATF agents to the front door. On a signal, they poured out and started to circle the Branch Davidian house.
I saw this man jump out the second truck, and he says, "Okay, guys, okay, you know, boys." And then I heard a lot of voices, and then I heard just one voice near the door.
David Koresh opened the front door and spoke to the agents.
I couldn't see him from where I was, but I heard his voice raised saying, "Just a minute, you know, there's women and children here, let's talk about this." And he no sooner got those words out of his mouth and all these shots, I could hear these shots from outside.
Later, it would be fiercely argued whether the first shots came from the ATF outside or the Branch Davidians inside. Following the trailers, the TV news team was caught in the crossfire.
Maybe 20 yards onto the property, and all of a sudden all hell broke loose. I mean, just gunfire like you wouldn't believe.
Inside the house, Branch Davidian Wayne Martin grabbed a phone and dialed 911.
This is Lieutenant Lynch. May I help you?
Yeah, there's 75 men around our building, and they're shooting at us in Mount Carmel. Tell them there are children and women in here and to call it off.
Across the road, neighbor Robert Spoon and his family huddled on the floor, warned by the ATF 5 minutes before the shooting began.
It's like a war zone. It's unbelievable. You know, we were pinned down to about 1 o'clock, and then we walked out of the back and kept the house between us and the compound, raining, and our little girl's still going to therapy.
After 2.5 hours, the two sides negotiated a ceasefire. 4 ATF agents were dead. 20 were wounded. 5 Branch Davidians were dead. An uneasy calm settled in as the gunfire ceased.
It's quiet. You don't see anybody outside, but you knew from all the things that happened, all those bullet wounds, all those things that were wrong with the window, you knew something happened, and you realized it's never going to be the same. There's no way that life could go back the same way.
By now, we all know just how right Sheila Martin was. For the next 2 months, the world watched as Koresh and his followers seemed to hold the forces of the U.S. government at bay. Over the next hour, we'll take you step by step along the trail of the Waco disaster. Every fact about it seemed to lead to another question. Who was David Koresh? Why would his followers risk their lives for him? And why did the defenders of American justice respond with such deadly force? It's a tortuous path, marked by fear, passion, and the sound of automatic gunfire. Attack at Waco will return in a moment.
Only Embassy Suites hotels give you a suite with 2 big rooms, a free cook-to-order breakfast, and evening beverages on the house. Because only Embassy Suites is twice the hotel. Call 1-800-EMBASSY.
Pilot pen was absolute supreme quality then, and if anything, it's even better today. It's different and it's unique. Pilot is the absolute best pen that money can buy.
Choosing a mutual fund. How does it make you feel? In today's up and down market, it could drive anyone nuts. The smart thing is to start small. $50 a month in a Janus no-load mutual fund. $50. How does that feel? Start to think big. Janus Funds.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
The new Trooper Limited from Isuzu is thoughtfully equipped with stuff like dual airbags and extra skid plates, so that you're always prepared no matter where you go.
You may already be a $10 million winner.
Even if it's just down to the corner and back.
How much do you pay for a minute of long distance?
45 cents.
Oh, get out.
About 60 cents.
About $1.50. I have no idea. I'm sure it's a lot.
85. Now Sprint introduces a whole new way to save on long distance. Every evening and all weekend long, a minute is just 10 cents. It's that simple.
That looks like a dime.
1 minute, 2 minutes, 3.
E pluribus unum.
Who says a dime doesn't buy you anything anymore?
Call now for 10 cents a minute and get up to 100 minutes free.
We now return to Attack at Waco here on A&E. As news of the disastrous ATF raid on the Branch Davidian headquarters reached Washington, the ATF was immediately relieved of command. The FBI took over amid a barrage of criticism about the failed assault.
There was no medical evacuation system for an hour and 40 minutes. That's ludicrous as far as I'm concerned. People can bleed to death over that period of time.
American Justice requested interviews with the Justice Department, the FBI, and the ATF. All requests were turned down. The ATF commanders, stunned by the deaths of their agents, denied that they had known the Branch Davidians were expecting them. The real attention was now focused on the group's intriguing leader, the man named Vernon Howell, who had changed his name in 1990 to David Koresh. Comparisons were drawn immediately between Jim Jones, who led his followers to mass suicide in Jonestown, Guyana, and Koresh.
These people have been subjected to undue influence and are under his direct control. They look to him as virtually God. They believe that he is a channel from God to the world, and they obey him accordingly.
We were involved in the Bible, and what we heard come out of his mouth, we could look in the page and see it was there. So for that reason, we had that faith in him and what God had given to him as an understanding to give to us.
The Branch Davidians are an offshoot of the well-established Seventh-day Adventist Church, whose adherents believe that Jesus will return to earth soon to signal the end of the world. Koresh had grown up as a Seventh-day Adventist in Texas. He had questions about life that his ministers could not answer.
The more hurt he had in his life, the more he turned to his Heavenly Father. And especially after he turned 19 was when I noticed that he spent so much time on his knees and fasting and praying and studying the Word. I mean, he'd go off for hours down in the woods and pray, and he would, go stay in his room for 2 days at a time and not eat.
In 1981, his quest for answers led Koresh to Waco. There, he joined the Branch Davidians, whose leader was Lois Roden. Koresh, at that time still Vernon Howell, became Roden's understudy and rival to her son George, who believed he should inherit his mother's mantle. Lois Roden died in 1986.
George Roden, according to the reports in the newspaper and so on, drove Vernon Howell and his following away at gunpoint. They then moved to Palestine and organized themselves there.
Most of the Branch Davidians left Waco with Koresh. In Palestine, Texas, they lived in school buses and shacks. Koresh led worship outdoors or in this cabin where he lived. Then in 1987, George Roden dug up a corpse on the Mount Carmel property. Roden wanted to challenge Koresh to a resurrection contest. Whoever could raise the dead body would be the true leader of the Branch Davidians. Koresh did not take up the challenge. Instead, he and 7 armed followers invaded the Mount Carmel property. A battle ensued, in which Roden was wounded. Koresh and his comrades were all arrested and charged with attempted murder. All were acquitted except Koresh, who went free after his jury could not reach a verdict.
That's when we got a call. David got a call and said, listen, George is off Mount Carmel now. It's time to move back in. So that's when the people loaded up and just took over Mount Carmel again.
Koresh now devoted himself to preaching and recruiting new followers. He explained that he had special power to interpret the Bible, especially the book of Revelation, the part of the New Testament describing the end of the world.
But this must be interpreted to get its full meaning, right? And who has the right to interpret it?
The book of Revelation predicts a final battle between good and evil. Evil is represented by a beast. Koresh believed that outside forces of authority, including the U.S. government, are part of the beast system.
It tells you in chapter 13 that this 10-horned beast that looks like a leopard and has all these various traits of character, and the 2-horned beast in the same chapter says both of them receive their power and their authority from the dragon, which, if you go to chapter 12, it says the dragon is the devil. So most of the world today is controlled by the devil.
There's only 2 sides, good and evil, and David was definitely on the good side.
Koresh and his followers built the Mount Carmel ranch house themselves in 1990 and lived communally. Following Koresh's instruction, the most committed followers, even married couples, lived in single-sex dormitories. Koresh himself had one legal wife, but had sex with more than 10 other women in the group and bore children by 7 of them.
So he had more than one wife. Some of God's favorite people had more than one wife. The scriptures say, when a man goes into a woman, she is his wife. Do not put her away, take care of her. That was David's philosophy. It wasn't easy, I tell you, for him. It's not always fun having more than one wife, because you know how women are.
The group survived off the members' savings and the incomes of those who worked in and around Waco. They also began gathering and trading in firearms, particularly assault rifles.
Not only did they believe what the ancient writings of the Bible taught and what they interpreted those teachings to be, they also were very modern in a lot of respects. And when the Bible talks about take up a sword, well, in modern times a sword's not going to do you much good, so they interpreted that to be guns.
The ATF began their investigation of Koresh and his group in June 1992. After a UPS employee discovered hand grenade shells like these in a torn package headed for the Branch Davidian ranch. The ATF soon confirmed that Koresh was buying parts to assemble machine guns and hand grenades. These weapons are illegal without a federal license, and Koresh did not have one. In fact, by 1993, Koresh and his Branch Davidians had almost 400 firearms on the property, including 2 50-millimeter rifles capable of piercing armor.
We heard, automatic gunfire, and a lot of people heard that 50 caliber going off. There's people way over there on the other side of the highway that heard the 50 caliber when it went off.
Former Branch Davidians told the ATF that Koresh was having sex with minors and was beating children. Ex-members also warned that Koresh was actually stockpiling weapons in preparation for the end of the world, the final battle between good and evil, and that he trained his followers, even children, to commit suicide. The ATF made a fateful decision to storm the ranch and arrest Koresh there, instead of looking for a chance to seize him when he was off the property. The undercover operation, which might have pinpointed Koresh's comings and goings, was discounted. In part, critics would later say, because the ATF wanted to make a public example of the Branch Davidians.
At least part of the ATF motivation, even if it never rose to the surface of discussion, was to enforce the morals of our society, to enforce the psyche of right thinking by retaliating against these odd people.
On February 27th, the first installment of The Sinful Messiah appeared in the Waco Tribune-Herald. Worried that Koresh would be upset by the article, Bonnie Haldeman called the Mount Carmel ranch to talk with her son.
And he says, when are you coming to see me, Mama? And I says, well, I don't know, maybe next weekend, when I'm off. He says, well, good, I love you, Mama. Come when you can. Wish you were here.
The next morning was Sunday, February 28th, 1993. By noon, the ATF raid had left 9 people dead. Koresh and his heavily armed followers hunkered down to resist the beast at their door. The FBI began negotiations with Koresh on the spot, but progress was slow, and the pressure to get results was enormous. When American justice returns, we'll see how the feds decided that talking was not the answer and turned instead to overwhelming force. We now return to Attack at Waco. From the very beginning of the siege at Waco, the FBI was confounded by their unusual adversary, David Koresh. They didn't know whether to keep negotiating or use force, a confusion which critics argue ultimately led to deadly failure. In the gun battle with the ATF, Koresh himself had been shot twice. Now he made calls to local radio stations, talking live on the air about the raid.
Well, I've been hit through. Watch out. Okay. I've been hit through the stomach, and I think it broke my pelvic bone and went out my back.
Keep it elevated.
We're trying.
The FBI cut phone access to the house and used a single line for negotiation. The radio station continued to broadcast written statements by Koresh, and in exchange, the Branch Davidian leader began sending children out in pairs. Then, on the third day, Koresh promised that if the FBI arranged for the radio broadcast of an entire recorded sermon, he would bring the whole Branch Davidian group out. Detailed plans for the surrender were made. On March 2nd, the 58-minute tape was played by KRLD Radio in Dallas.
I, David Koresh, agree upon the broadcasting of this tape to come out peacefully with all the people.
The FBI rushed ambulances and school buses to the front gates to await the mass exodus from the ranch house. But at the last minute, Koresh changed his mind, telling the FBI that God had told him to wait. For many in the FBI, this was the moment that convinced them that Koresh was a manipulative liar who could not be trusted in negotiations.
He says that he did not fulfill his promise to leave immediately with his followers because God told him to wait.
When it came right down to it, Koresh just wanted the FBI and the authorities to go away. And with 4 dead ATF agents and 20 wounded and other people killed, that just wasn't going to happen.
We just were willing to sit still as long as they were not going to do anything to us and nothing was going to happen outside as far as shooting, and we could wait as long as they weren't going to hurt us when we weren't going to hurt them. So we felt it was going to be a while.
Still, adults began surrendering on March 2nd. The FBI decided early on not to let family members of Branch Davidians speak with their relatives inside the house. Even when David Koresh's mother, Bonnie Haldeman, came to the roadblock with the attorney she'd hired for her son, she was turned away. On March 8th, the besieged group tried to counter what they felt was unfair media coverage. They released a videotape of many members expressing their desire to stay in the house, and of Koresh introducing his children and some of his wives to the FBI negotiators.
Say hello, Jim. Say hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Hello, John.
Hello, John.
Gary.
Gary.
Henry.
Henry.
John.
John.
There's another John, too.
John.
Fearing these tapes might win sympathy for Koresh and his followers, the FBI decided not to release them to the news media. Compassion for the Branch Davidians, they thought, might sway public opinion against an assault on the house. The FBI tactical commanders decided to cut off power to the house on the night of March 12th. But after 2 adults surrendered that day, the negotiators appealed to the FBI commanders to leave the power on as a reward. The appeal was rejected, and power was cut. No Davidian would leave the house for 8 days. On March 14th, the FBI began a psychological assault, erecting high-powered lights and shining them at the house all night. Sheila Martin decided to surrender to the FBI on March 21st. 4 of her 7 children had left early in the siege. 3 now remained. She was among 6 Branch Davidian adults to leave the house, the largest number in a single day. Again, the negotiators requested that the tactical commanders respond positively. But that night, the tactical teams bulldozed the Davidians' cars away from the house and began playing loud recordings of Tibetan chants to interrupt their sleep.
They used exactly the wrong tactics. They subjected them to the common and unifying experience that psychologists will tell you will bring people together, cause them to bond.
As they increased the pressure, there was more and more hesitancy, I would say, on the part of the people to comply or to want to come out and surrender to them.
If that was a mistake, then perhaps the result was that more people did not come out. But there are those that, for instance, that believe that by not using more forceful means earlier on, that they may have contributed to Koresh's reluctance to want to resolve the whole situation earlier.
The rate of surrender slowed to a trickle and then stopped. Only one more Branch Davidian left on March 23rd. 14 adults and 21 children had now surrendered. The FBI made repeated demands that more adults come out, and when none did, the armored vehicles pulled the perimeter closer and closer around the house. The lights and the noise continued.
One thing that I think was probably uppermost in everybody's mind at that time was the threat that the Davidians would come out with their children firing weapons, and then you got these sharpshooters having to try to make these decisions with perhaps 100 people out in this field.
Koresh and his right-hand man, Steve Schneider, assured the FBI repeatedly that they were not going to commit suicide. But in interviews with adults who had left the house, the FBI was hearing of several different mass suicide plans discussed by Koresh. It was one more factor that made the agents lean toward a tactical assault. Finally, on March 29th, the FBI allowed attorney Dick DeGuerin to go up to the house and meet his world-famous client face-to-face for the first time.
He was angry for what had happened to them. He was frightened, as anyone in that situation would be. And yet, he was defiant. He was defiant because he felt he had a right to be.
DeGuerin returned 4 times, and on the last 2 visits was accompanied by Jack Zimmerman, attorney for Steve Schneider. The lawyers believed they convinced the Branch Davidians they could beat a murder rap.
And we advised the clients that they needed to come out immediately, follow us out that day, and that they had a very defensible case, and that we thought that the evidence that we saw, if it could be preserved, would substantiate their version of what happened on February the 28th.
But by this time, early April, the feds were giving up hopes of a negotiated surrender. On April 14th, Koresh sent Dick DeGuerin a letter. The waiting was over, he said. God had commanded him to write down his interpretation of the portion of the book of Revelation known as the 7 Seals. Then he would submit to American justice. I will come out, Koresh wrote to his lawyer, and then you can do your thing with this beast.
Do I believe that they were lying to me? No, I don't. I get lied to, and I've got a pretty good bullshit detector. I think that they were sincere.
Promises like that really didn't mean anything, I think, to the authorities because of the history of broken promises that they had experienced during the course of the standoff.
3 days after Koresh announced he was decoding the 7 Seals, U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno approved a plan to raid the ranch house. Just before 6 a.m. on April 19th, the tanks rolled to the house. The plan was to fill the house with CS gas, a riot control agent, for 48 hours. Then, if the Branch Davidians had not fled, the tanks were to attack the building. But within minutes of starting the gas attack, the tank drivers reported that they were receiving fire from the house. The order went out to penetrate the building right away. The FBI thought the Branch Davidians would run out through the openings.
Some of the tank drivers noticed that there were people inside, but they were not coming out. And I think that that's when they realized that they had quite a different situation on their hands, that the plan was probably not going to work.
Inside, Clive Doyle remembers, pandemonium reigned.
Most of the adults, I'd say, had gas masks. Of course, there was no mask that could fit the children. They don't make them that small, or at least we didn't have any that small. So from what I understand, the mothers were trying to cope with that by putting wet towels around their faces.
Around noon, smoke started billowing out of the building. Then flames licked out through the windows. In Waco, Sheila Martin watched on television as the flames engulfed the house.
The fire just got bigger and bigger, smoke, and at some point you're saying, well, where's the fire engines? And at some point we just knew it was too late, and we saw the whole building just gone.
All of a sudden it was like there was just heat and flames all around us, and all I know is I hit the floor, and I was writhing around in pain, trying to stop my hands from being burned, trying to protect my face and so forth. I could hear people screaming. I just couldn't take it anymore or whatever, and I jumped up and just did a head-first dive through the black smoke, hoping to go out the hole.
Clive Doyle was one of only 9 Branch Davidians to leave the fire alive. 80 others, including Koresh, died on April 19th. Among them were 3 of Sheila Martin's children.
They said they were so close together that the bones were meshed. And that's how hot the fire was. And you just can't think, you know, that they went through such a horror.
Among the ashes of the Waco disaster, the most pressing question was, who set the fire? Was it a mass suicide by the Branch Davidians? Or did the FBI tanks accidentally set the house ablaze? The key evidence to solve that mystery would have to wait until 1994, when the U.S. government would put 11 surviving Branch Davidians on trial for the murder of 4 federal agents. That's next. American Justice will return in a moment here on A&E. We now return to Attack at Waco here on A&E. The fire at the Branch Davidian house in Waco, Texas, stunned the world. Officials in Washington reacted immediately. And U.S. Attorney General Janet Reno, who had been in office less than 6 weeks, placed herself in the center of the frenzy.
I made the decision. I'm accountable. The buck stops with me.
And that was just so refreshing that some politician, particularly an attorney general, would accept responsibility for any mistake. But in the same breath, she said that it wasn't her fault.
We had information, and I'm not sure the timing of the information, as that the babies were being beaten. I specifically asked, you really mean babies? Yes, that he's slapping the babies around.
That's a crock that Janet Reno ordered that to save the children. He killed the children. How much more abuse can you have than all those dead babies that are there? They're dead.
I think law enforcement almost wants the children to be inside. The only way you could want that is the assumption there will be a rational response, i.e., if the children are inside, the group inside will have no recourse except to surrender.
The FBI later denied telling Reno that children were being abused during the siege. And Reno would later explain that the FBI's hostage rescue team could not handle a siege of indefinite length. The Bureau had no backup team to pick up the reins if the first wave needed to take a break. As the ashes of the Mount Carmel house cooled, there was nothing left to do but clean up. Every possible bit of evidence, however charred, was needed for the trial of the surviving Branch Davidians. In August 1993, a grand jury indicted 12 members of the group on counts ranging from gun violations to conspiracy to commit murder. At the same time, Attorney Dick DeGuerin was busy assembling a team of defense lawyers for the Branch Davidian defendants. To argue the case of Clive Doyle, he called on Houston attorney Dan Cogdell.
I got on a plane and flew to Parkland and walked through a gauntlet of the FBI, the ATF, the Texas Rangers, Parkland Hospital Police, and I saw a man handcuffed, his legs handcuffed to a bed with third-degree burns from his crotch to his knee, from his elbows to his fingertips, and I thought that is not the way this is supposed to go down in the country, and I volunteered my time on the spot.
When the trial opened in San Antonio on January 12, 1994, the 16 defense attorneys attacked the ATF for provoking the initial shootout, and the FBI for destroying evidence at the crime scene. Lead prosecutor Ray Yan struck back, telling the jury that Koresh taught a theology of death, and that the defendants took an active role in arming and preparing the group for all-out war with federal agents. The prosecution brought in more than 20 ATF agents from the botched raid. They painted a vivid picture of the gunfight, highlighting the deaths of their 4 colleagues. But the presence of the agents also gave the defense their chance to put the shootout in a new light by impeaching the honesty and judgment of the ATF.
Preparing to defend yourself from an anticipated wrongful attack is not a crime. If you bought a gun to have at your home to prepare yourself from a burglar attacking or someone trying to hurt your wife or children, That's not a conspiracy to kill a burglar.
The ATF agents suggested the defense were no better than government burglars. Undercover agent Robert Rodriguez, who had been in the Branch Davidian house the morning of the raid, described for prosecutors Koresh's reaction to being tipped off that the agents were on their way. He said Koresh had warned, "Neither the ATF nor the National Guard will get me, Robert. They got me once, and they'll never get me again." This threat was a key to the prosecution argument that the Davidians ambushed the ATF. Then the defense took its turn.
The government was pitching and we were catching. So our defense was primarily the cross-examination of the government's witnesses and to unspin the government's spin on things.
Defense attorneys got Agent Rodriguez to explain how his ATF commanders pressed ahead with the exposed raid, despite the agent's warnings. The lawyers insisted the Branch Davidian gunfire was not an ambush, but a defensive reaction.
If the Davidians had wanted to kill the ATF, they would have killed each and every one of them. I mean, they're coming out of a cattle car, for Christ's sake, with a full auto weapon. You know, a child could have gunned them down.
The prosecution's key witness was Branch Davidian Catherine Schroeder, who agreed to testify in exchange for leniency. On the stand, Schroeder spoke of Koresh's military preparations for the apocalypse, but he showed his followers combat films and told them, if you can't kill for God, you can't die for God. Schroeder said 5 of the defendants carried weapons during the firefight. 3 others had been armed during the siege, as she herself had. But she had not seen any of them shoot. Schroeder also described Koresh's plan to wire himself with explosives and then surrender, only to blow himself up, killing the FBI agents as they came to arrest him. Throughout the trial, David Koresh was frequently a scapegoat. For the prosecutors, he was the leader of the murderous conspiracy. For the defense, Koresh was the perfect alibi, a selfish, false messiah who had seduced and misled their clients.
I do think that David was aware that his world was coming to an end. I mean, what a great lifestyle. I mean, he had all the women, all the money, all the guns, all the toys. I mean, he lived like a king.
Unfortunately for the prosecution, Schroeder pointedly denied any conspiracy to kill the federal agents. Her description was actually more to the defense's liking, that the sect members had taken up arms on Koresh's orders and defended their home against excessive force.
It doesn't matter who fired the first shot. The law clearly is that you don't have to wait for the first shot to defend yourself. If you reasonably believe that you're about to be attacked with deadly force, you have the right to resist with deadly force. That's clearly the law.
The key witness for the defense was Attorney Jack Zimmerman, one of the 2 lawyers who had entered the house during the siege. He testified that the damage he had seen there indicated an all-out savage attack by the ATF, without concern for the lives of the women and children inside. As for the fire that claimed 80 lives, defense attorneys suggested that the FBI tanks had started it by knocking over propane lanterns. But the prosecution presented a strong case that the Branch Davidians had set the house ablaze. They played surveillance recordings of the sect members discussing plans for arson. In closing arguments, the prosecution ridiculed the defense's image of their clients as innocent religious devotees, reminding the jury that the Branch Davidians had amassed a giant arsenal. The defense retorted that to cover up its own sloppy law enforcement, the government was scapegoating the Branch Davidians. Dan Cogdell told the jury not to be fooled by the government's version of events or by the military lingo.
I mean, it just never stopped. The spin doctors never stopped their parade of idiocy. I mean, it was an amazing thing to sit there for almost a month in trial and say, okay, what are they going to call a grenade today? And it's a diversionary device. Or my favorite, a grenade at one point became rapidly expanding gases. It wasn't an explosion, it was rapidly expanding gases. Give me a frigging break.
After 4 days, the jury acquitted all 11 Branch Davidians of the murder charges. But the jurors voted to convict 7 of them on gun charges and 5 for voluntary manslaughter as well. Clive Doyle and 2 others were acquitted of all charges. The outcome was widely viewed as a major defeat for the government because they failed to win the murder convictions.
7 people were convicted. 7 people out of 11 were convicted today.
Even though the jury cleared the defendants of murder, they did convict for murder-related weapons violations. And at the hearing on June 17th, Judge Walter Smith followed strict mandatory sentencing guidelines for those gun convictions. The Branch Davidians are now serving terms of 5 to 40 years as they appeal their convictions. After the trial, jurors said neither side ever proved who fired first. But one thing they were sure of, both the Branch Davidians and the government were in the wrong. The ATF raid and the April 19th attack by the FBI had especially shocked the jurors. "This is America," said one. "This isn't a police state." Attack at Waco will return in a moment. And now, the conclusion of Attack at Waco. Today, the site of the Branch Davidian house outside Waco is a tourist attraction. Visitors come from neighboring towns or from as far away as Europe to see the place where David Koresh and his followers died together in the fire watched round the world. At the insistence of Treasury Secretary Lloyd Benson, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was subjected to a scathing review by a panel of outside analysts. Before the report was even released, ATF Director Stephen Higgins stepped down. In all, 5 of the top officials involved in the Waco incident lost their jobs over the handling of the Branch Davidian raid.
I don't think you're going to ever see the ATF attacking anybody again. Anybody that ever mentions putting automatic weapons and body armor and military helmets on an ATF agent again will probably be sent to see a shrink, all right? Psychiatric exam.
The Justice Department also completed a lengthy review of its handling of the siege and the final assault. But critics believe the Justice Department, and particularly the FBI, have not been completely open about the events at Waco.
The FBI has never subjected itself to thorough external investigation in its history since the 1920s, nor have they been held accountable in the way other agencies have been held accountable. And part of this, again, goes back to the magic of J. Edgar Hoover and the mystique he created and the fear he created among the political apparatus in Washington.
Edward Dennis evaluated the FBI actions at Waco for the Justice Department review. He says that placing blame for the Waco tragedy would be inappropriate.
These are dangerous situations. They're not like fairy tales where everybody lives happily ever after. I think the most that you can expect of the men and women who are asked to go forward on behalf of our society to try to resolve situations like this is that they stay as close to their training as possible, and that they're disciplined, and that they apply themselves conscientiously. All that was done here.
90 people lost their lives in the name of gun parts. That's bullshit. 90 people did not have to lose their lives over gun parts, no matter what they say or whatever spin or how they want to justify it or who they claim won, lost, or tied. 90 people died in the name of gun parts, and that's wrong.
The families of the dead Branch Davidians have sued the Justice Department, the FBI, and the ATF for wrongful death. As for the Branch Davidians not in prison, men scattered. A few, like Clive Doyle, remain behind in Waco, Texas, a town whose name will forever be linked to David Koresh and to the events of March and April 1993.
A lot of people think, well, they got what they deserve and they should have done this and they shouldn't have done that. And I'm staying here, can't even tell you why I'm staying here, but basically waiting for a resurrection is what we're doing, where God will intervene and those that died will be resurrected and brought back, and things will go on from there.
I may die tomorrow. I don't know exactly where I stand. I just hope God has mercy on me. He left me here for some reason to suffer a lot more, I guess. But I do know David, whatever he was, if he was right or he was wrong, he had guts. How many men would stand up against the federal government for what he believed in?
It's not going to be forgotten. God's going to work it out. It's going to come to pass, and we're all going to have to stand. All of us are going to have to stand before God, and they're going to have to know. There's going to be a terror. The Bible says they're going to be ashamed, and this is what we can see is going to happen. It could have been different. Now, David kept saying to the people, "This does not have to be this way."
You guys, you do it your way, I do it my way. You got to argue with me, you catch me on the side of the road somewhere, you come and argue with me. You come point guns in the direction of my wives and my kids, damn it, I'll meet you at the door any time. And I'm sorry some of you guys got shot. But, hey, God will have to sort that out, won't he?
According to the coroner's report, 19 of the 80 Branch Davidians who died on the day of the fire were killed by close-range gunshot wounds. That number included David Koresh and his number 2 man, Steve Schneider. The government believes this to be the grisly proof of the suicidal intentions of the group. The surviving Branch Davidians still insist that suicide was against their beliefs and that their friends would only have taken their own lives if they were trapped in the fire. One of the gunshot victims was Clive Doyle's 18-year-old daughter, Sherry. Doyle says that if his daughter chose a bullet in the head over burning to death, he would not hold it against her. And neither, he says, would God. I'm Bill Kurtis. Join us next time for another episode of American Justice here on A&E.